My name is Rebecca Hale. And the night the truth finally walked into our VFW hall, the microphone let out a thin squeal, like a kettle left on too long. I was holding a folder that smelled faintly of dust and copier toner. Dad stood 10 feet away, arms folded over his Hale hardware polo jaw, clamped so tight the tendons in his neck stood out. Chase hovered at the edge of the dais in a perfect parade rest that still couldn't hide the tremor in his right hand. Someone from the city council shuffled papers. The Gazette reporter clicked her pen. I lifted one sheet and read a line that began, "On scene mission commander," and the room went as quiet as a church basement, just before the coffee urn empties. Chairs creaked. A veteran in a ball cap muttered, "Well, I'll be." Mom stared at my mouth like she'd never quite noticed the shape of it before. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The words on the page did the work, and what they did more than anything was drain the color out of my father's face. But it didn't start there. It started months earlier on a Friday night fish fry at VFW Post 1123 in Chillicothe, Ohio. You could find the place by the glow of the Schlitz sign in the window and the line of pickup trucks with salt on their wheel wells. The frying oil had been used a few too many times. It had that weary smell that clung to your sweater. The ladies at the dessert table guarded their pecan pies like sentries. Somebody's grandkid was selling 50-50 raffle tickets. On the TV above the bar, a high school game from Hernstein Field played on mute boys in red and black moving like paper cutouts. I was making change at the door because that's what I do. Quiet things that keep a room running. 10 for 2, I said, sliding bills into the cash box, stamping palms with faded blue ink. Dad breezed in wearing his jacket with Hale hardware stitched over the pocket. Behind him came Chase and his wife Tori, fresh from Columbus, all shine and cologne. You could almost hear the air shift, people sitting up a little, the way they do when a story they know by heart is about to get told again. Evening. Hank said Bill Reeves, an old friend who still kept a jar of loose bolts on the counter at our store. How's the boy? Dad didn't need more than that. The boy? He beamed, clapped Chase on the shoulder. Top of his class at West Point, you know. Strategic mind. He's our West Point golden boy. He said it like a full title, like the governor might send a limo any minute. Then he tipped his chin my way and added not unkindly, but loud enough. Becky's here helping out. She was just a grunt. There were chuckles, the polite kind that try to be soft and fail. I felt heat bloom in my cheeks, and then pass the way a skillet flares when oil hits it. I slid another 10 into the cash box. "Welcome, Bill," I said. "Fish is still hot. Watch the bones." Tori kissed my cheek, light as a moth. "You look wonderful," she said, which in her mouth always meant, "You look fine considering you don't try very hard." Chase hugged me solid and careful, smelling like cedar and aftershave. "Hey, sis," he said, and I believed he meant it. None of this was his invention. He was simply the clearer mirror people like to look into. We sat at a long table under a faded POWMIA banner. The batter on the fish was thick and a little sweet, like the ladies had used pancake mix. Dad spread his elbows wide, pulling the conversation into his orbit. You know, he told Bill and anyone else listening, strategy's what wins wars. Some folks swing hammers, some folks draw the plans. He cut a glance at me that could have been affectionate if it had landed different. Thank God we got a planner in the family. "Pass the tartar sauce," I said. Mom slid it over with a small smile that asked me not to take the bait. She has a way of smoothing napkins that could calm a thunderstorm, but it doesn't change the weather. "Remember when Chase got that appointment?" Dad went on. "I tell you, I stood taller that day." He chuckled. "Now, Becky, she's good with fixing things. Engines, generators, tough as a boot. But Chase..." "Dad," I said softly. He blinked like a man who'd caught a gnat. "What, I'm bragging on you both?" Bill, to his credit, cleared his throat. "You know Becky deployed too, Hank." He aimed it like a gentle nudge. "More than once." Dad waved with his fork. "Oh, sure. She did her time. What was it? Honey root clearance and civil something." "Civil affairs," I said. The words were flat and uninteresting in the air. We help connect commanders with the people who live where we are. And yes, I did route clearance before that. I cut my fish. The crust made a hollow sound against the plastic plate. Made a real difference. I'm sure, Dad said. And it could have been genuine if he hadn't already placed the trophy in the other hand. Chase Torrey said brightly, "Tell them about that seminar in D.C., the one with the general who said you had a gift." Chase tried to demur. It was just a lecture. "Tell it," Dad said, eyes shining. So Chase told it the way you tell a thing when you know your audience wants a certain shape. He kept his voice low and modest. He left out Afghanistan entirely. Most people do when they can. The fryer popped like a tiny firecracker. Behind the bar, Jolene the bartender turned up the radio and oldies station. Don't Stop Believin' eased out like someone's wedding slideshow. I felt the room hum around me, same as it had my whole life. Church at First Methodist 4th of July parades fall leaves caught in the maple at the corner of Paint Street. This town runs on stories. Once one gets going, it's hard to steer it another direction. When the raffle started, I stood to help count tickets. A little boy pressed his nose to the cake table and left a fog mark. "What do you think, Mom?" asked quietly, not looking at me. "I think the fish needs new oil," I said. She smiled with her eyes. "You always did notice what makes a thing run." On our way out, the February air bit my cheeks. The parking lot was a patchwork of melted snow and grit. Dad clapped my shoulder, heavy, friendly. "Proud of you too, kiddo," he said. "World needs hard workers." "I know," I said. He didn't hear the tired in it, or maybe he did and filed it under Becky being sensitive. Chase hugged me again quick. "Drive safe," he said. Torrey waved from their SUV. I drove home past the dark windows of Hale Hardware. The neon open sign was off, and in the glass I caught myself for a second hat, pulled low hair, tucked up messy jaw set. At the house, I hung my coats at the empty cash box on the kitchen table and ran the sink until the pipes stopped groaning. My phone buzzed with a message from an old medic friend, Paige, a photo she'd found in a box me in a mud-splattered uniform beside a battered generator, grinning like a fool. "Remember," she wrote, "you kept that clinic lit." I stood there a while, listening to the furnace tick and the house settle. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice and gave up. I thumbed a reply and then erased it. People think revenge is hot, a boil, a yell, a slam. For me, it's the opposite. It's a steady flame under a pot you don't look at until the water moves all on its own. At church that Sunday, the pastor preached about pride, as pastors do when the calendar is blank between holidays. Dad shook hands in the aisle. He glowed when someone mentioned Chase's name. Afterward, as we stood in the parking lot with breath-making little clouds, Mom squeezed my fingers. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said and meant it more than I had Friday. Not because anything had changed, but because something had settled inside me. I didn't need to win an argument at a fish fry. I needed the truth lined up neat as bolts in a drawer ready to be pulled out when the right customer walked in and asked for the right size. That was the week I opened the old footlocker in the hall closet and took down a flat file of papers. Orders. After action reviews. A citation I'd never framed. I ran my finger down the paragraph that began with on-scene mission commander and stopped when I reached the name. I didn't say it out loud. I didn't need to. The words did the work. We didn't arrive at the fish fry as strangers. We arrived as a family that had been rehearsing the same parts for years. Long before Chase's photo ever made the Gazette, the script started at Hale Hardware, where Dad set me on a milk crate behind the register and told me to mind the bell. I was 9. The cash drawer snapped like a clapboard, and the rubber mat by the door smelled like pencil erasers after a good mopping. I loved the little bolt drawers with their stamped labels, 1, 4, 20, 5, and 16, 18 rows, that stayed honest if you kept them counted. Dad swears I asked every old-timer fine thread or course. Maybe I did. I liked making things work. It felt like speaking a language only I could hear. We lived 2 turns from the store in a ranch house with mint green siding and a maple that could bury a bicycle in October. Friday nights meant Herrnstein Field red jackets, zipped to the chin, breath steaming in the lights, the marching band wheezing out the horse. Mom passed a thermos of cocoa down our row and reminded Dad to clap for both teams. He tried. But his eyes kept straying to Chase, as if some recruiter might walk the bleachers and tap our family on the shoulder. "You, sir? Your boy is the future." Chase fit the picture people like to carry in their wallets: clean report cards, good posture, a handshake that landed. He lined his awards along the dresser like bottle caps in a straight row. When he said West Point, Dad cleared space on the mantle before the application was even printed. He taped a scrap over his workbench, beat Navy, and grinned every time he saw it. It was like the house tilted a few degrees toward the Hudson River, and we all learned to walk with that lean. I fit a different shape. At First Methodist, I stacked chairs without being asked. When Mrs. Pennington's mower died in mid-August and her grass waved like a flag, I pushed our old Toro 3 blocks and cleaned her carb in the driveway, while she stood behind the screen door with a box fan aimed at her knees. "You're a good girl," she said. I didn't feel like a good anything. I just liked the moment a stubborn engine caught and smoothed out the way a rattle went quiet when you finally found it. The letter from West Point came on a Thursday, when robins were back and the gutters were full of grit. Mom set the envelope on a dish towel like it might leak. Dad handed it to Chase and hovered behind him, reading over a shoulder he'd practically built himself. When the words ran the way he dreamed, he whooped so loud the neighbor's dog answered. By supper, the acceptance was on the fridge, held by a magnet shaped like Ohio. By evening, 3 casseroles materialized on our porch. Congratulations, you could reheat. Nothing bad had happened. But the foundation shifted half an inch and every picture frame in the house needed straightening. At the counter, Dad's stories gathered a shine. Customers came in for drywall screws and left with a rundown of plebe year. I still ran the label maker and pricing gun and loved the way a fresh box knife sang through corrugated. But gravity learns new tricks in a proud man's mouth. You spend long enough hunting one star and you can miss the whole sky. Nobody was cruel on purpose. This is Ohio. People mean well. Meaning well still leaves bruises if you bump the same place every day. Senior year, a guard recruiter set up a folding table outside the cafeteria jar of Jolly Ranchers tri-fold glossy with desert sunsets that didn't match our halls. He didn't hard sell me. He asked what I liked. I said working with my hands, figuring things out, going where I'm useful. "Engineers," he said, tapping the brochure, "route clearance, dirt and brains." I took a sour apple candy and the pamphlet and thought about a different map than the one Dad kept on his bench. When I brought it up at dinner, Mom's fork paused over the green beans. Dad didn't look up from the Gazette. "You can do better than a starter job," he said, like I'd proposed bagging groceries. "It's not a job," I said. "It's service." "And there's the GI Bill." He flipped a page. "You've got a job here. Family needs you." He wasn't wrong in the narrow sense. Shelves had to be faced. Invoices had to be coaxed into a wheezing computer every morning like a man climbing stairs. Chase rinsed his plate. "You could do ROTC," he said. "Or OCS later. Keep options open." "I will," I said, and the words felt elastic, stretching over a future I couldn't see yet. Fort Leonard Wood introduced me to heat that lived in your socks boots, that carved a raw smile into your heel, and a drill sergeant whose voice could etch glass. I learned to name the parts of things the way I'd named drawers at the store. I learned a convoy is a family of steel that only moves if every member does. On Sundays, I wrote home on cheap stationery that left ink on my fingers. Mom kept the letters in a shoebox tied with blue ribbon. Dad put my return address in his flip phone and never did figure out why my numbers kept changing. During annual training, I ended up under a Buffalo mine-protected vehicle doing a thing nobody taught me listening. Machines talk if you let them. A hydraulic line has one voice, a worn bushing another. A sergeant yelled, "Hale, you some kind of whisperer?" I said, "No, I just hate a rattle." He snorted, "Keep at it. Rattles get folks killed." That made a clean kind of sense the way bolt threads do. You follow the vibration until the truth shows itself. When I came home on leave, my pants were bloused wrong and my haircut made my ears look bigger. The guys at the VFW bought me a beer and told me I reminded them of their sisters. Dad introduced me as our girl helping Uncle Sam, which is a nicer version of what came later. When Chase visited from the academy, the room took on a hum you could feel in your teeth. I watched from the edge like a ceiling fan, necessary but background. I don't remember the first time Dad used the phrase, just a grunt. Maybe it was a joke that landed and hardened. Maybe some customer said it and he tried it on like a cap that fit too well. He didn't mean it to cut. He meant it to settle himself. He wanted a story where his son drew big circles on a map and his daughter kept the lights on. Both are useful, he'd say. He wasn't wrong about that. He was wrong about gravity. How words repeated can pin a person in place even when their feet keep moving. Chase and I weren't enemies. We were different tools in the same drawer. He called from a hallway payphone at Beast Barracks to ask how Mom was sleeping. I told him about Mrs. Pennington's mower, or how the bakery switched donut recipes, and the town flirted with riot. We laughed more than we argued. Rivalry sells better than the truth, which is two kids learning to live under a father's pride that throws a long shadow over everything it loves. Later, when I commissioned OCS after a couple deployments, Mom brought cookies in a blue flower tin she'd saved forever. The armory smelled like floor polish and old flags. Dad shook my hand and kissed my forehead in the same motion, as if one gesture was for public and the other was the part he didn't know how to say out loud. "Proud of you," he said. "World needs hard workers." That's the highest thing he knows to offer. It should have been enough. Some days it was. What I carried from those years wasn't anger so much as habit. Keep things running, don't make a fuss. Let loud folks talk until they run out of air. I kept the store's label maker humming when I was home and generators humming when I was gone. Church bulletins, football lights the bell over the door, stitched together by small jobs done right. If you want to hear where revenge begins, it isn't a shout. It's a ledger in a quiet head, a line you draw between a bell and a microphone, a milk crate behind a register and a folder you'll open one night in a crowded room. When I think back, I don't hear strings swelling. I hear a price gun clicking, an AM farm report buzzing, the sigh a furnace makes when it catches. I smell hot dust in a vent and hand soap that never quite cuts the grease. I feel the maple shade as I load cases of water for the church picnic. Nothing heroic. Just weight and a way to carry it. That's the ground everything else will push off, a town that knows your name. A father who wants the brightest version of it on display. A brother built for the frame, and me learning, I don't need the frame to be real. Chase's graduation from West Point looked like a movie I didn't audition for. Rows of gray uniforms, a sky that couldn't decide between sun and cloud brass catching the light. Dad wore a tie he saved for weddings and funerals. Mom had a tissue bunched in her fist before the first name was called. When Chase's turn came, his shoulders squared in that easy way of his, and he took the oath with a voice that rang in the stadium speakers. Dad squeezed my elbow. "Listen to that," he said, as if sound alone could build a future. After the ceremony, we pinned his butter bars and took a photo in front of the statue of MacArthur. In ours, Dad stared at Chase like a man who just met proof he'd done one thing right in his life. I stood on the edge of the frame wind, pulling flyaways from my bun the way wind always finds the loose thread. Chase went to Benning, next Infantry Basic Officer Leader course. Then long weeks chasing a little black and gold tab that still makes men stand taller when nobody's looking. His letters home were short and controlled. Doing fine. Learning a lot. Food is terrible. Don't tell Dad I said that. Dad didn't need letters. He had a running narration. Toughest school there is. That boy's born for it. I was born for something too, though nobody had a speech for it. In our company motor pool, I learned the personality of each vehicle the way you learn the moods of your family. The Buffalo's hydraulic arm groaned like an old man when the seals ran tired. The Husky's ground-penetrating radar hiccuped on washboard roads. The field generator coughed if you didn't baby the choke. My hands were always half black under the nails, no matter how hard I scrubbed with that orange pumice soap. Hale hears the rattle. Before it rattles, Sergeant Luis Ortega liked to say. He smoked the same brand he swore he was quitting and kept a tiny notebook folded in his breast pocket where he wrote down things he didn't want to forget. Fuel numbers, birthdays. What size socket fit a bolt on the underside of a mirror bracket when your head could barely find the space? We trained like training would save us, which sometimes it does. Route clearance is a family of metal moving down a road at the pace of patience. Huskies feel out the ground. Buffalo arm pokes at suspicions. RG-31s watch the flanks. Everybody listens to the air. You learn to read the shade of dirt the way a farmer reads a sky. You memorize how villagers stand when they're curious versus when they're warning you without being able to say it. Some days, it's nothing but sun and chatter on the net. Some days, an old soda can is wrong by half an inch and the hair on your arms rises before your mind catches up. At night, when the tent fan finally found a rhythm and my socks dried near the end of my cot, I thought about home. I pictured the bolt drawers. I pictured Mom cutting coupons with the TV tuned to the farm report. I pictured Dad balancing on a stool to fix a flickering fluorescent in the lawnmower aisle. When he called the morale line, he asked after weather and carburetors and whether our church was still collecting for the food pantry. Then he told me how Chase was doing. They say he's a natural. With maps, Dad would say, warm as bourbon. You should see him brief a room. I said I'd like that. I meant it. But I also pictured a road in front of me like a thread that needed following and felt in my bones that somebody had to keep walking. The first time I thought about commissioning, it wasn't ambition. It was need. We were on a training range outside Irwin where the dirt gets into your ears and doesn't leave for 3 showers, and a young lieutenant, fresh polite, overwhelmed, kept losing the thread of the plan when the radio stacked 3 voices at once. Ortega handed me the net for 3 minutes so the kid could breathe. Say the thing plain, he told me. I keyed the mic and said it the way we'd say it in the hardware store when the morning rush hit one at a time. Here's where we're going. Here's who carries what. Here's when to hand me the next box. After Ortega flicked ash into a bottle cap and squinted at me. Hale, he said, you ever think about OCS? I shrugged. He shook his head like I'd missed a nail. You run a room better than you think. I filled out the packet that winter on a Formica table in a chow hall that smelled like overcooked eggs. Mom mailed my birth certificate twice because the first copy wasn't raised seal enough for someone. Dad didn't say much, which is its own kind of speech. You'll do fine, he allowed, like we were discussing snow tires. Chase on the phone said, good call. You already act like an officer. Might as well get paid like one. I could hear cadence in the background, voices punching holes in the air. OCS felt like learning to take apart a clock while it kept running. Land nav under red light ruck straps, burning grooves into your shoulders, a TAC officer, with a voice that lived in the back of your skull even when he wasn't around. I liked the parts. People dreaded the planning cycle the moment you gather a room and turn confusion into tasks, the humility of listening to the sergeant who's seen 5 versions of your brand new idea. I liked ending a long day with a plan scribbled neat enough that you could hand it to a stranger and they could make it move. Dad came to my commissioning in a sport coat that smelled faintly of WD-40, which is to say, home. He hugged me with one arm. With the other, he shook my hand like he was closing on a sale. Proud of you, he said. World needs hard workers. I told him we agreed. Mom cried the soft way, the way you only hear if you've known a person your whole life. Chase sent a text with a photo of his boots on a tarmac. Welcome to the club, he wrote. It felt less like a club than a shift change. Civil affairs came next, a job that asks you to know the map and the people who live on it. If engineers taught me to hear the rattle, civil affairs taught me to hear the room, who speaks first. In a village council, how tea gets poured, what a nod means when a mouth says yes and a chin says not today. I learned to carry roll-up solar panels and crayons for kids and a calm voice for grown men who needed money for a generator they would guard like it was their child. I learned to sit cross-legged without my foot falling asleep. I learned to walk away when a promise couldn't be kept and to write down a name 3 times so I wouldn't forget it after a 12-hour day. We attached to infantry battalions often enough that I could predict the jokes before they landed. Hearts and minds. Right, some private would say, grinning. I'd grin back and ask who kept the lights on at his cousin's gas station back home. People, I'd say. Same here. When the work went right, it was unremarkable. A well pump turned over a market, reopened a school, got 3 boxes of chalk. When it went wrong, it was because somebody wanted the story to be easy. A map doesn't care what you wish the ground looked like. The ground is the ground. Chase and I crossed time zones like 2 hands on a clock that only sometimes line up at noon. He sent a photo from a briefing room with a screen full of arrows and blocks. I sent one of a clinic generator with a new fuel filter and a kid in a Spider-Man shirt giving me a serious thumbs up. Dad printed both and put them on the pegboard near the register. Customers tapped chases with a knuckle and whistled. They glanced at mine and smiled the way people smile at postcards. The orders that would put us in the same slice of Afghanistan showed up in my inbox on a Tuesday that felt like any other coffee too strong a run, that left my lungs tasting like pennies a calendar that refused to give up free afternoons. Different units, same province, dates that overlap like hands in a prayer. I didn't tell Dad specifics. You don't? Not really. I told Mom to check the batteries in the weather radio and asked her to make sure the furnace filter got changed on time. I will, she said. You always remember the small things. It's how big things hold. I wish I could tell you I felt a bell ring in my chest, some grand omen. I didn't. I felt the usual list forming, pack, call the bank, make copies of the will I never updated because it felt dramatic. I felt the old steady flame. I felt the road unspool ahead, quiet as thread. And somewhere in that future road, though I couldn't know it yet, lay a stretch of 3 days when the radios wouldn't stop and the map would argue with the ground, and the story my family told itself would run out of words. The 3 days started the way trouble does small like a pebble under your boot that you think you can ignore. Paktika had that washed-out look, the color of a paper bag, and the wind carried grit into places you didn't know you had. The air on the forward operating base smelled like hot dust diesel and the ghost of burned plastic that clung to canvas. At 04:30, the generator coughed, caught, and settled. I checked my notebook list. Batteries, water blivets, interpreter pickup, a meeting with the district elder about the broken well that never stayed fixed. The radio net was busy, early overlapping voices, like a family talking over each other. Ortega sipped coffee, the consistency of roofing tar, and raised an eyebrow. Feels weird, he said. I shrugged. It all felt weird if you wanted to be honest about it. By 0700, the first mortar fell somewhere you could measure by the delay between thump and whistle. It wasn't close. It wasn't far. The warning siren did its tired scream and then gave up. You learned to measure fear by the steadiness of your hands, not the noise. Mine were steady enough to pull on a plate carrier without fumbling the clasps. We crouched in the T-wall shadow until the all clear, and then we did what we always do, went back to doing. Paige the medic said, "You want me to chase the well meeting?" And I said, "No, we're pivoting. District Clinic needs fuel. Their generator's coughing like ours did a month ago. You'd think I had something against clinics running the way they kept finding us." The map on the table was the same map it always was. Roads that were more like intentions, a river drawn with a line that never sat where the actual water went. A convoy was due with supplies that would make a dozen small problems solvable, and there was talk of moving folks out of the valley before weather, and washed-out crossings made that decision for them. The company commander's voice on the net was clipped calm. The XO's was absent, then present, then absent again. Not unusual in the first hour of a day. Radios are cowards in the presence of concrete and hills. We rolled midday to check the route to the clinic, juggling interpreter schedules and a police chief who wanted to talk tea before gasoline. A buffalo hit a patch of road that looked like road and wasn't, and the arm shivered in a way that told me to add a bushing to my mental list. The sun came down like a hand. Children waved. An old man watched us pass with a face like a leather boot. A herder raised 2 fingers, and then one which meant something to him, and something else to us. I kept us moving. In the early afternoon, the net got crowded in that way that makes you want to take a number. Frags came over with new tasks. A schoolhouse needed a generator check. A culvert was compromised near a ford we counted on. The BNS3 wanted heads at a meeting that had already started. "Tell them we're on the street," I said to our RTO, "and we'll send a rep when we're off it." He gave me a look and then repeated it in cleaner radio English. I've never been good at speaking in codes when the ground is yelling in plain language. Somewhere in that thicket of hours came the phrase, "Nobody wants to hear." Medevac is delayed. The details were thin and stayed thin. weather somewhere, or a priority shift, or a bird grounded for a maintenance issue nobody in our lane could fix. I thought of the well meeting that would not happen, and of the clinic generator that would not run, and of how time grows heavy when flight is waiting on a bolt in a hangar 2 provinces away. Ortega said nothing. He doesn't waste words when silence will do. Late afternoon, a convoy ours, but not took the wrong fork in the road because the ground had washed away last season and never been told to the map. You could hear the moment the driver said the word, "You say," when you recognize a place you shouldn't be. We redirected them with a whole lot of if-then in our voices and a little bit of prayer. They reached the junction with nothing worse than a garden of curses and a bent step. The RTO exhaled. "Copy. They're back on the line," he said, like we'd dragged them with string. I didn't see Chase that day. I saw his name on a net list and his unit block on a roster, and then the absence, which looked like an empty doorway in a house you know by heart. The first rumor came sideways, overheard more than announced. "LT Hale," someone said, meaning him, not me. "He's off station." Another voice. "Who cleared?" And a third, tired nobody. "He just left." I felt a prickle under my plate carrier that had nothing to do with heat. You don't write down rumors. You stack them on a shelf you keep separate from the bolts you count in front of people. The night didn't settle. It hovered. Radios layered a unit looking for a route that had ceased to exist. A medic asking for a time to spin a civil affairs team, us pushing fuel at a clinic that ran on hope and habit. Paige and I wrestled a drum into place and bled the line. "Come on," she murmured, as if coaxing a child to take a breath. When the generator turned over, it did it grudgingly, then settled into a healthy thrum that eased something in my chest I didn't know I'd been clenching all day. The clinic's lights stuttered, then held. A nurse in a blue headscarf smiled without teeth and touched her heart. I touched mine, back the little ritual that says more than words can quickly fit. Somewhere toward dawn, after we'd traded our last good idea for an hour of quiet, I stepped outside the compound and watched the sky turn the color of dishwater. The goats smelled like goats. The dust tasted like a penny on my tongue. Ortega came out stretched until his back popped and said, "Your brother's unit is a mess." He said it without malice, like a weather report. "He okay?" I asked, which is not the same question as, "What did he do?" Ortega shrugged. "Don't know. Folks are tight-lipped. Heard dereliction from a mouth I trust, then heard stress reaction from another. Both can be true." He lit a cigarette and cupped the flame like a secret. "You good I'm here," I said. "Sometimes that's all you get, and sometimes it's everything." By the third day, we were all stretched thin enough to see light through. The CO was stuck at a site that needed him just as badly as we did. The XO's vehicle had eaten a rock and was waiting on a part that wouldn't arrive. The battalion wanted 3 things at once, as battalions do. A flash flood upstream made rumors about the road into facts, and the clinic that had just gotten its heartbeat back needed bodies moved out before the valley shut like a door. I put a finger on the map and then took it off because I trusted the ground more than the ink. "We can do this," I said to no one and to everyone. "We've done harder with worse." Ortega nodded once crisp. Paige rolled her kit and snapped it closed in one motion. The interpreter found his hat. News about Chase arrived the way a storm rolls across fields back home, patchy, contradictory and undeniable. The phrase AWOL came from a mouth that didn't say it lightly. Another voice insisted he'd self-reported, rattled, not calculating. My stomach made a small mean twist. I wanted to be angry. What I felt was something duller and heavier, worry for him, and a grief for a story that was breaking into pieces we'd have to pick up and live with. That night, if it was nighttime, lost its edges, the sat phone at the TIOS picked up a call to Ohio and carried it across whatever ocean sits between fields and mountains. Dad's voice arrived, thin, excited. He told me about a sale on mulch at the store, the church rummage coming up, how Mrs. Pennington asked after me. Then he said, "Chase is doing big picture work. You'd be proud." I stood in a hallway that smelled like bleach and dust and said, "I am." It was true and not true in equal measure. I did not say what I'd heard. He would not have heard it from me anyway. At the end of those 3 days, nobody gave out medals. Nobody wrote a country song. The roads were worse than before, the radio's hoarse. The coffee burned the generator in the clinic, still miraculously steady. We slept in pieces. I dreamed of bolt drawers, the simple salvation of a label that matched what it held. When I woke, I wrote down the work that had to be done next, then the work after that. Revenge did not enter it. Survival did. And tucked alongside survival was a new unwelcome math, the cost of a brother's absence, the weight of a father's pride that could not imagine it. By the morning of the 4th day, the valley road had turned from dirt into idea. Rain upstream came down in a hurry and took the shoulders with it. The little river that usually behaved like a lazy dog had stood up on its back legs and showed teeth. The clinic we'd nursed back to life sat on a low rise that would be a mud island by night. Word came in broken pieces. Families moving uphill with bundles, a midwife asking for blankets, a district cop wanting a truck that didn't exist. The company commander was pinned at another site across a washed-out crossing. The XO's truck had a busted diff and a prayer for parts. Battalion pushed a fragmentary order frago that boiled down to this clear: what you can evacuate, who you must, don't lose anyone to water or panic. I put my palm on the map and felt how useless it was. The river line should have been blue. Today, it was brown and wider than ink allowed. We're not waiting on perfect, I told Ortega and Page. We start with what we can move. Our interpreter Fareed hovered eyes quick. I squatted to his height and told him the plan. Twice once. In slow English, once with hands. He nodded, then nodded again, a man trying to hold 2 thoughts that kept slipping. We staged in the lane outside the clinic. It smelled like wet bread and diesel. A backhoe. The local council swore worked fine yesterday, sat nose down in a rut, a broken tooth on its bucket, grinning like a chipped smile. The buffalo's arm groaned when it swung. The husky tiptoed ahead, reading a road that kept changing under its feet. You can't fix a river, Paige muttered, cinching her aid bag tighter. Nope, I said, but you can fix a line through it. Lieutenant Ortega said, low. You want to call higher for a go, no go? I looked at the sky and then the faces. Women with babies wrapped in bright cloth, an old man with a prayer bead looped round his fingers, 2 boys shouldering a sack that sagged with dishes. I keyed the radio. Be advised, I said steady. We're executing the frago and initiating evac of priority cases from the clinic. Company is split. XO is down for maintenance. On-scene command with civil affairs element hail. The net crackled with 3 other conversations, none of them mine. Nobody said no. In this business, sometimes that's your yes. Okay, I said. We do this in pieces. We pulled the backhoe with the buffalo like coaxing a stubborn stump inch by inch until the bucket cleared and the wheels remembered their job. Ortega and a local mechanic dove under it with a length of chain and the faith that steel and cursing share a language. I set teenagers to carrying sandbags, with Fareed's voice rolling over them like a drum. Slow, I told them, palms down. If you run, you fall. If you fall, you slow us. A section of culvert had blown sideways, leaving the road to pour itself into a ditch deeper than it looked. We didn't have the right equipment to rebuild it. We had strap shovels and the memory of how water likes to move. We're not engineers, a private said, half apology. We're everybody today, I said. We built a temporary channel with what we had and less than that. I trusted the old math gravity patience, a machine's willingness not to betray you if you speak to it like a partner. The clinic's doctor, tired kind, brought me a list in careful script 6 non-ambulatory elders, 2 high-risk pregnancies, a boy with an asthma chest that rattled like loose silver. We can carry 4 at a time in the back of the RG if the road holds, I told him. But we need room to turn without sliding. He glanced toward the river that wasn't where rivers belong. You will do it, he said, not quite a question. Yes, I said, and believed it in the way you believe stairs exist in the dark. The first load is the worst because it teaches you what you forgot. The RG fishtailed once, and I felt every sinew in my back lock. Feather it, Ortega told the driver voice level as a carpenter's bubble. We made the turn. The Husky's operator called out a soft spot, and I marked it in my head with a star no one else could see. Next time, hug the wall, I told him. He said copy and meant it. Behind us, the clinic generator coughed and settled loyal as a dog. Good machine, Paige said, patting the metal like a shoulder. On the second trip, the wind shifted, and the smell of wet earth turned sour in a way I can't explain except to say it made my teeth ache. Fareed's voice cracked and he went silent. His eyes were glass. I stepped into his line of sight and put 2 fingers to my chest and then outward, with me, the sign we use when words don't work. He blinked and the world climbed back onto its tracks. I am with you, he said, and picked up the rhythm, translating directions and comfort with equal care. By late afternoon, we had cleared 20 people. I ran tick marks on my wrist with a Sharpie that bled into sweat. The road tried to quit us 3 times, and we talked it out of it. The local police chief, who loved a meeting more than a shovel, finally put his hands on a sandbag and worked until his breath rasped. The A&A squad we'd been told not to trust much stood where I pointed and didn't wander. I will say this for a crisis. It introduces you to the best version of some people and tells the truth about the rest. Halfway through the 3rd load, my radio hissed, and a voice from Battalion's scratchy remote asked for an update and casualty count. 0 friendly KIA, I said. 0 host nation KIA. Road compromised, but passable with control. Evac ongoing. There was a pause long enough to finish a prayer. Who is on scene mission? Lee, the voice asked. It was a formality, a box to fill a future line in an after-action review. Civil affairs, I said. First Lieutenant Hale. I didn't say Rebecca. Names make things personal in ways paperwork doesn't like. At dusk, the sky turned nickel, and everything slicked up the kind of wet where the whole world is a handshake that could slip. I wanted lights we didn't have. I wanted gravel that wasn't there. What I had was Ortega's half smile, and Paige's calm, and Fareed's stubborn heart, plus 3 soldiers who'd follow a voice that sounded like it knew which way was forward. We put a high-risk mother in the back, and her husband climbed in like a man stepping on holy ground. You ride up front, I told him. Hold this. Don't touch that. Breathe. He gripped the dash like it might change its mind. When we reached the high ground, he touched his forehead to my sleeve and said nothing. I prefer gratitude without speeches. It doesn't ask you to stand there and figure out where to put your eyes. In the last light, I felt the road give one final time a lazy slide that could have become a river's invitation if the driver had panicked. Steady, I said, all the strength I had pressed into that one word. He set his jaw and kept the wheel where it belonged. We crept. We exhaled. We kept moving. We finished in the dark. The clinic sat empty enough to sleep without one ear open. The doctor pressed a slip of paper into my hand with numbers I couldn't read in the moment and didn't need to. Tomorrow, he said, the water will make a liar of us again. Tomorrow, I said, we'll see what holds. He smiled. It looked like grief and relief shook hands. Back on the fob, the generator hummed like home. I wrote the AAR in the quiet hour when coffee tastes like pennies and the keyboard sticks on the S key. I put in times and grid lines and the names I could spell. I wrote on-scene mission commander 1LT Rebecca Hale because it was true and because systems like truth better when it's printed neat. Ortega slid a DA Form 638 across the table with a look that said, "Don't argue." Paige signed as witness. I didn't read the narrative right away, but later I saw ARCOM with V device recommended valor, not for glory, but for keeping a line unbroken. It felt too big for what we did and exactly right for the way we did it. I showered under water that turned brown before it went clear. Then I called Mom from a phone that made our voices thin as thread. I told her the weather would break soon and to remind Dad to change the furnace filter. "I will," she said. "You always remember the small things." I did not say anything about floods or titles. Those are not small things. They also don't belong in a kitchen at 10 at night with the back door cracked to let the Ohio spring in. In the morning, the river had chewed another bite out of the road and the sun was brand new like it always is. I taped the AAR to the packet that would go where packets go when nobody's looking, and I put the citation in a folder I didn't plan to open for a long time. People think Triumph tastes like champagne. To me, it tasted like clean water from a canteen, a crust of bread, and a room where the lights stayed on because a machine kept its promise. Homecoming didn't have a marching band. It had a plane that landed late in Columbus and a shuttle driver with a cough, and then me standing in my kitchen at midnight trying to unscrew the stubborn lid on the peanut butter because the bread was stale and I didn't want to go to bed hungry. My boots thudded in the hall the way they always do, and the house greeted me with that old combination of dust and laundry soap that never quite leaves. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the closet where the footlocker lived, then decided not to open it. The folder with the AAR and the citation could wait. Let the truth sleep a little, I thought. It had held all it needed to for now. The next morning, I drove to Hale Hardware because that's how you learn where you fit. After you've been gone, you go where the day needs you. The bell over the door gave its cheerful ding, and the store smelled like it always does, fertilizer and rubber hose, a faint whisper of WD-40 that clung to the pegboard. Dad looked up from the counter, startled, then hid the startle in a smile and a clap on my shoulder. "There she is," he said as if I'd run to the post office and back. "Could use your hands in plumbing." Behind him, a vinyl banner hung crooked over the mower display, "Welcome home, LT. Chase. Hale." The exclamation point leaned the way a man leans when he's trying to look taller. A Gazette clipping was taped under it. Chase in dress blues at some ceremony, jaw set just right, medals catching light. Customers paused there like churchgoers in front of a new stained glass window. One whistled low. "Fine young man," he said to Dad. "Your boy's a credit." Dad's mouth went soft, the way it does when praise lands in the spot he keeps open for it. "He is," he said. "Strategic mind." He didn't mean to step on me. He didn't even see he had. I grabbed a box of PVC elbows and headed for aisle 3. The box dug into my hip in that ordinary way that always makes me feel better. If you've ever stocked shelves, you know the relief of things that make sense. 1/2 inch, 3/4, 1 inch. Slip thread reducer. I could have put those elbows away blindfolded. By afternoon, the drip line of town had found me. Mrs. Pennington shuffled in with a list and a tin of cookies I pretended I didn't see. Bill Reeves needed drywall screws and asked like men do when they want the real story without admitting it. "So good to have the kids home, huh?" "Kids. We were pushing 40. Good to have everyone breathing," I said. He nodded like that was all a man could ask. The whisper about Chase started in the garden center and drifted to the register. Someone's cousin had a nephew in a unit that had heard. Stress reaction. I heard one woman say, compassion bending her voice. "Happens to the best." A man with a John Deere hat said AWOL's a strong word. I don't buy it. Dad bagging bolts into a paper sack said, rumors. Folks don't know what the field really is. He said it gently, the way a man smooths a burn into the lawn with his foot so the grass looks even from the porch. I didn't add my piece. I've learned the value of silence that isn't surrender. Each version floated above us like dust motes in a sunbeam dancing impossible to catch. I stocked rang-up cut lengths of rope. I told a teenager how to seat a flapper valve and warned him not to over-tighten the nut. "Hand tight is enough," I said. He looked at my hands like he was hearing a sermon he hadn't known he needed. That night, we ate meatloaf and mashed potatoes at the house as if no time had passed. Mom set out pickled beets in her glass bowl with the chip on the rim. Chase sat across from me and buttered his roll with the carefulness of a man who needs a small, controllable task. Tori scrolled her phone under the table and then caught herself and set it face down like a repentance. The clock over the stove ticked unembarrassed. Dad cut into the meatloaf and said, "Grace," the way he always does, thanking God for the roof and the food and the opportunities he's given to our family. Then later, he said the thing he says. Chase briefed a room of colonels. He told Mom as though she hadn't heard it twice already from the ride over. "You should have seen it. Strategy. Big picture." He looked at me and softened his voice. "Someday, you'll understand that part, Beck." "I understand pictures," I said. "I just like the ones with people in them." He smiled like I was being cute. "Both kinds matter," he said, and that should have been the end of it. but the old habit pulled one more sentence out of him. Some folks plan the bridge, some folks tighten bolts. Chase's fork hovered, then settled. He didn't look up. Mom touched my wrist under the table, a small apology for whether she never learned how to change. After we cleared plates, I took the trash out to the big bin by the garage. The night smelled like laundry vent and the neighbor's grill. A train horn carried from the tracks by the river, that long, hollow sound that makes you feel both small and placed. I leaned my shoulder against the siding and let the cool move through my shirt. I don't cry much. I didn't then. What I felt wasn't sharp enough for tears. It was a tiredness that went down to the studs. Sunday, I went back to First Methodist. The hymn was one we'd sung at funerals and harvest services. Words about steadfast love that everyone knows by muscle memory. Afterward in the parking lot, Mrs. Pennington hugged me with flour on her sweater and said, "You look thin," which is Ohio, for I worried. A man from the city council shook Chase's hand like he was checking the grip on a new hammer. The pastor said to me, "Your dad's proud," and I said, "I know," and let it sit there like a bolt in a drawer you don't need today. The Gazette ran a piece, "That week, local heroes return." Chase's photo dress blues, that good jaw sat above the fold. The text was what those pieces always are, a polite list, a few quotes with safe verbs. Down in the third column below an ad for a lawn care service, and a notice about the council meeting, there was a paragraph about a joint effort that had evacuated civilians during flooding in a remote valley. No names, no specifics. Fine by me, mostly. The work is the work. Yet when I read it, my eyes stung, not for lack of credit, but for how thin words can get when they're spread over something that had weight. A week later, a plain envelope showed up from a place with a name that looks like numbers, if you squint. Inside was the citation I'd already read, the one that had lived quietly in my folder, ARCOM with V device. There was a small card with the Chief of Staff's stamped signature and a line about reflecting great credit upon yourself, your unit, and the United States Army. I stood at the kitchen counter and ran my finger over the raised seal. Then I slid it back into its sleeve and set it in the footlocker. I didn't hang it. It wasn't shame. It was private. Some truths do their best work without a spotlight. At the VFW that Friday, Jolene poured me a coffee that could have patched a roof and asked, "You back for a while?" I said long enough and took a stool near the end where the old men talk like it's a job. One of them, a Korean War vet with ears like open doors, squinted at me. "You're the Hale girl," he said. The Grunt. He didn't mean it mean. He meant it like shorthand in a world that loves labels. "That's me," I said. He nodded once, as if we'd settled the price of something. They turned the TV to the high school game. The band played Louie Louie like a dare. I watched the door and the mirror behind the bar and the banner for the scholarship fund that never quite met its goal. When Dad came in, men clapped him on the back and said his son's name. He bought a round he couldn't afford and told the story he knows how to tell. I let him. I let the town. I let the wrong story win that night. Because I had learned a more important lesson on a road that tried to become a river. You don't fight mud by yelling at it. You build a line one sandbag at a time, and you wait for the water to recede. On the way out, Bill Reeves tucked a folded paper into my jacket pocket. "Read later," he said. At home, I smoothed it on the kitchen table. It was an email he'd printed from a buddy who worked supply for a nearby post. A note at the bottom in a different voice said there was going to be a service appreciation night at the VFW with a city council commendation. Names to be read. You and your brother should both be there. Bill had scribbled. Folks ought to hear the whole thing. I stared at the paper a long time. The furnace kicked on. Somewhere a dog barked once and gave up. I took down the folder from the footlocker and laid the citation on top like the last piece in a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to finish. The wrong story had the floor for now, but rooms change when new people walk in. And I knew, too, I could ask Ortega and Page, who had stood with me when the road went slick and the lights came back on. I wasn't planning a scene. I was gathering facts. That's different. It's also how a town learns. The VFW email landed Tuesday with clip art flags and 3 fonts that didn't agree. Service Appreciation Night. It promised sheet cake to follow. Names would be read, certificates handed, the Gazette invited. I set coffee on a yellow legal pad and made a list the way I settle a noisy head. Call Ortega. Call Page. Print the AAR and citation. Email the MC with correct units and dates. Ask the battalion commander for a short note. Don't make a scene. Tell the truth. Let it stand. Ortega picked up on the second ring, a forklift beeping behind him. Hail, he said. Can you be in Chillicothe the Friday night VFW recognition? You want the valley told straight? I do. Copy, he said. I'll wear a clean shirt. Page texted, can swap shifts. Send when, where, then called. I can say 2 sentences, she said. 3 if there's pie. There will be, I said. Truth doesn't need volume, she said. I printed clean copies. The printer tried to eat page 2. I talked it out of it. The raised seal threw a dull shine. I slipped everything into a manila folder and penciled HALE on the tab, because pen ink looks like a billboard and pencil looks like housekeeping. My email to the MC was plain dates, units align noting on-scene mission commander, and a request to read a brief note from our old battalion commander. He replied quick, absolutely. Keep me honest on pronunciation. Mom stopped by with a foil-covered casserole. Your father's excited about Friday, she said. He's been practicing his handshake. I know. Her eyes went to the folder. Are you going to? I'm going to be accurate, I said. No fireworks. She nodded. No one ever taught your dad how to climb down off a story that made him feel tall. I'm not trying to shorten him, I said. Just stand up straight myself. That evening, I walked Hale Hardware after close moving a 50-foot rope back to its hook and lining up boxes so sizes marched in order. The click when things match is a small salvation. If revenge lives anywhere for me, it lives in that click, quiet, exact, unshowy. Chase called Thursday from Columbus. Dad wants me to say a few words, he said. I'll keep it short. Good plan. I heard Ortega and Page are coming. They are. I'll own what's mine if it comes up, he said. I'm sorry I left you with more weight than you should have carried. We both carried what was in front of us, I said. We'll do the same Friday. Rain started Friday, tapping the windows. I ironed a shirt I hadn't ironed since a funeral and polished my boots because old habits steady the hands. At noon, I stopped by the VFW to set chairs. The hall smelled like coffee and floor wax. Jolene pointed at a banner drooping over a duct. Make it look less sad, she said, tossing me tape. My magic is straight lines, I said, stretching it tight. Back home, I laid everything on the table. Manila folder, 2 pens, a copy for the Gazette, a Post-it with the MC's cell in case the microphone went sideways. Mom called to report Dad had chosen the tie with tiny flags. Do you want us to pick you up? I'll meet you there, I said. Arriving separately would be kinder. The hall filled early. Veterans in ball caps took the back row. The city council faced their folding table toward a borrowed seal. Certificates curled at the corners. The Gazette reporter checked batteries. Dad worked the room the way he breathes, hands on shoulders, names dredged up from church directories and old receipts. When Ortega came in pressed shirt boots that never pretend Dad clapped him on the back and started a story. Paige arrived with her hair pulled back and a look that said 2 hours of sleep would do. She hugged me once quick. You look like a person about to move a couch, she said. Feels like it, I said. You got this, she said. I brought my calm. I found the MC near the podium and handed him the envelope. Short note from a commander, I said. Would you read it before certificates? He looked relieved. Short is my love language. We said the pledge. The mayor thanked donors, caught himself on a mispronounced name, and laughed with the room. The sound system squealed, then settled. Coats steamed as rain knocked at the door. Jolene wheeled the cake to a safer corner like she'd practiced the route 100 times. Dad squeezed my shoulder as he passed. Proud night, he said. Your brother's going to make the town stand taller. Maybe we all will, I said. He didn't hear me, or he did and couldn't set it down. I felt the old urge to slide to the edge of the frame. Instead, I sat near the aisle with Ortega on my right and Page on my left, the metal chair humming faintly with the mic's bass. I set my palm on the manila folder so it wouldn't slide when it was time. The folder didn't hold glory. It held nouns and dates, the ballast that keeps a boat from flipping when the room leans too far one way. The MC tapped the mic. Before we present certificates, he said we have a brief note from a commanding officer who couldn't be here. He lifted the single page. People settled the way they do before grace. The reporter raised her pen. Dad leaned forward a half-inch the way a man does when a story he loves is about to be told. I didn't reach for the mic. I didn't clear my throat. I squared my shoulders and breathed. Revenge didn't feel like fire. It felt like standing in a straight line. You drew yourself waiting for the room to learn what it needed to learn. The MC lifted the sheet like it might bite. He cleared his throat into the mic, which made it crackle like a campfire. A note from Lieutenant Colonel Mark E. Donnelly. He read former commander of. He stumbled the battalion number. Ortega whispered it. The MC corrected himself. He writes, "Please extend my gratitude to the veterans and families gathered tonight. During the floods in Paktika province, our soldiers executed an evacuation under severe conditions. Local partners and U.S. personnel worked shoulder to shoulder. The operation succeeded without loss of life." He paused, squinting at the next line. The page had a dog ear where the copier had chewed it. He continues, "A special recognition to the on-scene mission commander who coordinated route clearance, civilian movement, and medical support." The MC frowned. Looks like the name is on the second page. My folder was already in my hands. I stood before my legs had time to argue with me and walked the 3 steps to the podium. The metal chair legs scraped. Jolene's cake knife chimed against the tray. I slid the second page to the MC and stepped back, palms open. No speech, no theatrics. He tilted the paper to the light. On-scene mission. Commander First Lieutenant Rebecca Hale. I didn't look at Dad. You can feel a change in a room without staring at the person who makes the weather. The air went still like a pond. The Gazette reporter's pen stopped mid-scratch. A veteran in a Navy cap let out a soft, "Huh." Ortega exhaled through his nose like a man who'd been holding a plank and finally got to set it down. The MC finished the note, 3 sentences about teamwork, a line about competence under pressure, the kind of language that belongs in files, and then tried to segue to certificates. Voices rustled, then quieted again. You can miss your window in a moment like that. I took it. I stepped to the mic. "I'm Becky," I said, because formality would sound like a costume. "You all know me. I stock bolts. I cut pipe. I still ask the dumb questions at the counter when your list doesn't say thread or slip." A couple of chuckles safe familiar. "I want to put a few plain facts in the same place at the same time," I said. "We had 3 messy days. A river took more road than the map had room for. The company commander was with a different crisis. The XO's truck was down and waiting for a part that didn't care who needed it. The Frago told us to clear what we could and move who we must. We did that with who we had." I rested my hand on the manila folder. It was warm from my lap. There's an after-action review in here. It says what we did times grids, who drove what, who moved sandbags without making a speech about it. There's a DA Form 638 that suggests an award I didn't hang on a wall. Both say the phrase, the MC just read. On-scene Mission Commander 1LT Rebecca Hale. I'm not telling you that for applause. I'm telling you because some of you have heard another story in the frozen food aisle, in the church parking lot, and towns run on the stories we feed them. I angled the folder so the reporter could see the line. Not waving it, just letting the words be visible. The mic picked up the soft rasp of paper. I'm not going to talk about anybody else's worst day tonight, I said careful. I'm not going to take a label someone threw at me because it sounded good in a proud man's mouth and staple it to my shirt. I was there. I made calls with a team that was there. 20 people slept dry who would not have. A clinic kept its lights. We came home with the same number we left with. That's the whole thing. Ortega stood without me asking. He doesn't love attention. His voice was the same as it ever is worn, steady. He didn't touch the mic, just spoke from 6 feet away and let the room come to him. Ma'am ran the line, he said. Called the turns. Didn't waste a word. Didn't lose her place when the road did. He hooked a thumb at me. When she said steady, My hands got quiet. That's leadership. Paige slid up beside him. I'm a medic, she said. I've watched rooms get loud when they get scared. Becky kept it simple when it wasn't. People are alive because somebody worked the problem. That somebody is sitting right there. She pointed with 2 fingers, like a nurse does when she tells you where your jacket is. The MC looked relieved to have witnesses do the heavy lifting. The councilman with the too wide tie nodded solemnly, as if he'd invented solemn. In the back row, a kid in a Letterman jacket whispered, "Dang," and wasn't shushed. Only then did I look at Dad. His mouth was set, but not in the familiar defiance. More like a man who'd realized he'd left his keys somewhere his hand couldn't reach. Color had gone out of his face in a way that made him look older than the polo suggests. Mom's fingers were tight on her purse strap, white at the knuckles. She saw me see her. She gave the smallest nod, keep going. I'm not here to win a fight at a fish fry, I said, because a few folks smiled at the shared memory. I love this town. I love the store that sells you the bolt you need and the mower blade that gets you through July. I love a Friday night at Herrenstein and a sheet cake with frosting that crusts at the edges. That got a laugh. Good. I want you to have the right story when you tell it in line at the bank. That's all. I held up the citation so the reporter could get a photo, then set it back down and slid the folder toward the MC. If the Gazette wants to read the AAR line for themselves, they can, I said. I trust you. The reporter nodded, already scribbling, "Hail Rebecca, Arcom Vi, on scene commander." From my right, a voice I knew as well as my own cleared. Chase stood. He didn't take the mic. He didn't need it. The room gave him the kind of quiet it always gives him. His chin was higher than it had been in the kitchen last week. His eyes were level. I won't speak for anyone else, he said. I will say I had a night in Afghanistan. I don't wish on anybody. I stepped away when I shouldn't have. I reported it. I live with it. He turned to me. She carried weight I didn't, he said. If you want a story, tell that one. It wasn't a confession for the cameras. It was a line a grown man draws when he's done pretending. It landed like a bolt in a hole that had been waiting for it. Dad made a sound that wasn't a word. He stood then, sat back hard. He looked like a man who'd been walking on a tilted floor for years and just discovered what level felt like. For a heartbeat, I hated him. For the next heartbeat, I pitied him. Then both feelings quieted into something like weathered love. Jolene, of all people, saved us from breaking. Well, she said, clapping once practical. As a kitchen timer, somebody cut the cake. Laughter bubbled up the good kind, the kind that lets air back into a room. The councilman grinned like he'd planned it. The veteran with the ears like open doors said about time. And then the applause started, not the polite kind, but the kind that comes from the belly. It wasn't for medals. It was for the relief of a crooked picture set straight. The MC, bless him, found his place. Certificates were handed out. The mayor shook hands until his knuckles creaked. People lined up for sheet cake corner pieces fought over like always. The Gazette reporter asked me to spell Rebecca twice and check the battalion number. I handed her the page with the line on it and watched her eyes widen at the words. She took a photo of the paper and then one of me and Ortega and Paige. I wiped my hands on a napkin first. Grease lives under your nails whether you want it to or not. Dad didn't come talk to me right away. He made a slow circle of the room like a man finding exit signs. Mom hugged me without words. Ortega squeezed my shoulder once. Paige leaned in. You good, I'm here, I said. It fit again. It filled the space it needed to fill. As the hall emptied, the MC slid my folder back. The papers inside were a little bent from all the eyes. Thank you for letting the document speak, he said. Makes my job easier. They're good at it, I said. Less likely to step on their own toes. On the way to the door, the Navy cap vet touched 2 fingers to his brim. Miss Hale, he said. Commander. It wasn't a rank he'd ever give me in any formal way. It was his way of saying he'd heard me. Some men in this town have to rewire their mouths before their hearts can catch up. He'd started the job. By the time we hit the parking lot, the rain had washed the salt off the pickup bumpers. The air smelled clean and metallic. The lights over the VFW buzzed. The banner over the door sagged on one side. I reached up and set the tape. The little click when it held was more satisfying than anything a speech could have offered me. The next morning, Dad unlocked Hale Hardware before the town woke. The metal gate clattered up like a sigh. The place smelled like fertilizer and winter coats that had hung too long. He snapped on the fluorescents and they flickered, then steadied. I was already there sitting on the counter with my boots on a lower shelf like I'd been 12 again and waiting for the first customer. The bell over the door made that hopeful ding even though nobody stood there. A regular Mr. Keating shuffled in at 8 on the dot for birdseed. He looked at Dad, then at me, then at the worn mat on the floor like the words he wanted were hiding under it. "Proud of you, kids," he said finally. "All of you." He slid a 5 across the counter and patted the sack like it was alive. Birds get loud this time of year. He left with the careful gait of a man who trusts his feet, but not the ice. Dad didn't speak until we were in the stockroom, where the receipt printer could make noise to give him cover if he needed it. Boxes of dishwasher hoses leaned against a stack of windshield washer fluid. He reached for a stool and didn't sit. "Beck," he said, hands on his hips. I waited. Silence can be generous if you let it. "Sometimes a story gets easy," he managed. "Golden boy." Just a grunt. It felt good in my mouth, like that made me taller. He winced at himself. That line last night, the line on the paper, made me feel small, but not the bad kind. The right kind. Like I'd been walking downhill and didn't know it. I thought of the banner sagging at the VFW the way the tape clicked when I pressed it back in place. "You didn't make the road," I said. "But you can stop leaning." He looked relieved that I hadn't made it harder than he could lift. "Can I?" He stopped, started again. "Can I frame that paper? Put it up by the pegboard with Chase's picture. Not to," he swallowed, "not to boast, to tell it straight. Put the photo of the clinic next to it," I said. "The generator, and Ortega and Page. Make the picture big enough to hold who it took." He nodded like he'd been waiting for instructions he could follow. The Gazette ran a Sunday piece that felt like it had been written by a person who had listened. The headline wasn't loud. "On-scene commander recognized at VFW." The photo showed my hand holding the page, not my face, not my father's. The caption read, "The operation succeeded without loss of life." It sat above the church listings and below an ad for mulch. Seemed fitting. Chase called that afternoon. "Coffee?" he asked, voice careful. We met at Carl's townhouse downtown, where the coffee is strong and the pies sit behind glass like saints. He wore a jacket too light for March and rubbed his hands like he couldn't get warm. "I started at the VA," he said, without preface. "A counselor named Mike, former infantry. Doesn't talk much. He asks good questions." "Good," I said, because praise makes some men flinch when they're raw. I told him the word Chase said, eyes on his cup. AWOL. He didn't let me hide inside stress reaction. He didn't hang me with it either. He finally looked up. "You were steady last night. I wanted to be mad at you for that. I can't be. We'll both practice telling the hard part and then going to work," I said. "That's the job, isn't it?" He cracked a smile that looked like our grandfather. We talked about small things. Mom's pot roast the pothole on Paint Street that grew a personality, whether the football team had a quarterback yet. When the waitress asked about dessert, he ordered pie and then pushed the last third at me like a peace offering. It tasted like apples and something you almost remember. He started volunteering with the high school JROTC on Thursdays. He didn't bark. He taught the quiet kids how to breathe before they briefed a map. Steady, I heard him tell a kid who couldn't stop wringing his hands. That word can hold a person up if you say it right. At the store, Dad cleared a space on the pegboard between the mower blades and the welding masks. He didn't make a shrine. He made a corner where the paper could sit under glass next to a photo of the clinic in the thin sun, and a snapshot of Ortega with his notebook half out of a pocket, and Paige laughing with her head thrown back like she'd tricked time for a minute. Folks paused there. Some read every word. Some just touched the glass with a knuckle like it could ring. Mom stopped straightening the frame every time she walked by. She started bringing a second tin of cookies to the VFW on Fridays in case the reporter shows up hungry. Jolene rolled her eyes and took 2. The Navy Cap vet saluted me in the hardware aisle one afternoon with 2 fingers. "Commander?" he said again, but easier this time, like the mouth and the heart had finally found the same page. Bill Reeves asked if I'd speak to his Sunday school about telling things plain, which is what they call testimony when they're shy of the word. I said yes, and brought the tick-marked wrist photo, because some people need to see ink to believe the count. The town didn't flip all at once. Nothing real does. It bent toward the truth like a plant toward a window. At First Methodist, Pastor Karen's sermon circled pride again, but this time she told a story about a man who apologized for something he hadn't seen, and a woman who didn't make a speech about forgiving him. Mom cried soft, and I squeezed her hand in the pew. Outside, Dad held the door for a line of people and didn't tell a single story while they passed. It might have been a miracle. On a Tuesday, I went out to Mrs. Pennington's house because her kitchen sink had decided to be dramatic. The trap fought me. I won. She made coffee that could have taken paint off a porch and asked if the story in the paper had embarrassed me. "No," I said. It took weight off. My arms got tired of carrying what didn't belong to me. Later that week, a young woman I didn't know came into the store and stood by the pegboard corner a long time. She traced a line of the AAR with her finger without touching it like you do in a museum when you want to read by feel. "I'm shipping next month," she said without looking at me. "They say I'll just count boxes." "I don't mind counting boxes." Her voice wobbled. "I want to be useful." "You will be," I said. "Say things plain when the room gets loud. Keep your hands steady. Don't wait for permission to do the next right thing." She nodded so hard her ponytail jumped. "Thank you, ma'am." "You don't have to ma'am me," I said, "but I'll take it. If you're listening for revenge, here it is. And it doesn't sound like a slam or a shouted victory. It sounds like a receipt printer humming, while my dad in his Hale Hardware polo says to a customer in a normal voice, "My daughter carried a tough day, and she did it right." It looks like a son in a too-light jacket walking into the VA week after week. It looks like a town learning a bigger story than the easy one. It looks like a piece of paper under glass that says something boring and exact, and 100 small eyes that take that line into their own mouths and repeat it until it fits. One night after close, Dad and I stood in the aisle with the mower belts, the place he likes to rest his weight against the shelving and think. He cleared his throat. "I'm sorry for how long I kept you small so I could feel big," he said. No one else heard it. That's how the best apologies work. I nodded. "I'm sorry I let you keep doing it," I said. We didn't hug. We went to the back and emptied the trash. The air smelled like rubber, and the last of the winter salt the mats shook free. The bell over the door dinged when the wind pushed it like the world reminding us not to forget to welcome whoever came next. If this story settled anywhere inside you, if a name you carry got smaller or bigger at the right time, I'd ask a favor, pass it along to someone who needs steady more than spark. Share it with the one person in your life who's been told they're just something. If you want to hear more plain-spoken stories like this, you can subscribe and leave a comment with a line of your own, something you set straight, or something you're ready to. Either way, I'm glad you're here. Keep the lights on where you are. Keep the line. Keep steady.